Okay, last piece, which is the veranda post of an enthroned king and senior wife. So we see the black and white images are the piece actually in there, its original context, which was actually in the palace of the king, on the veranda. This is understood, it's identified as a veranda post, and it's made to look like a veranda post, although it actually did not bear any weight, although it's made to look as though it does. Right. So if we'll look, you'll notice, as I mentioned earlier, we have some proportions that are not necessarily naturalistic. We have this very long neck. We have, the shape of the head is elongated, also an elongated neck here. The breasts are to indicate that she has had babies and has nursed, and breasts change shape when women nurse and use them for their intended purposes. And so those are not stylized, although her hairdo actually is. So it's obviously a very elaborate hairdo. We'll also see on her face these three marks, which is indication of it's scarification. So scars, intentional cuts placed on the skin to heighten beauty. So it was considered kind of a beauty mark. We'll also see that she has a gap in her teeth, which is also an indication of beauty. So of course you're probably wondering, if he's the king and she's the wife, why is she bigger than he is? And if you think about it, it's going to make sense, I think, in that the idea is that really, he as the king is only going to be successful as a ruler if he has the support of his wife and women in general, and that men can only be successful if they have the support of women. So even though he is the most important person here, in many ways, she's also clearly the person who offers the absolutely necessary support of him as king. You'll notice he's got a bird on his head. I'll talk with you about that. He also has this kind of conical crown. And then we have smaller figures here, which I'll talk about in just a moment. You can find this piece at the Art Institute of Chicago, which is where it's located now. But originally, of course, it was in Nigeria. This is the Yoruba people, who are primarily located in what's now known as Nigeria. We do have an artist name here, though. So I think this is our only piece of the African pieces in which we will get an artist name. So his name is Olowe of Ise, famous Yoruban artist. So we'll want to keep that in mind. Okay. So a little bit of information about this piece. So again, it's one of several sculpted pieces on the veranda at the palace of the king. So we're interested here in the interrelationship among the figures, primarily, of course, the wife and the husband, the king. She is standing behind him, so in that sense. So you might think, oh, that just means that she is behind him, and so that you could take that in one sense, but actually this would be the positioning they would be in when she would actually give him his crown. So the senior wife, would give her husband, who was being crowned king, his crown while he was sitting down, and she would stand behind him. So we'll want to look again at those exaggerated proportions, that really long neck, the very long elongated face, the very large eyes, especially on the woman, and the fact that we have, if this is completely in the round carving, and there's lots of space in between the figures, the two main figures, so they are clearly independent of one another. So he, as you know, is the focal point because he's the king, but he is dependent on others, right? The king does not just do his kingly stuff without any support, right? Many of the works that we'll look at in our study of African art are going to emphasize interdependence and family ties and community ties, which is going to be very different from obviously a lot of the art that we have in the West, which tends to, not always, at least in the past 200 250 years emphasize independence. So so I say senior wife because he has more than one wife. She is the first, she's the senior. So she, of course, is clearly very important, as marked primarily by her size. She, as I already mentioned before, would have given him his crown during the coronation. And so this positioning in which they're currently in mimics that, recalls that event. And so the senior wife is understood to be extremely important to the king because she has to be known and is supposed to have a lot of savvy, both political savvy, but also spiritual power, spiritual strength. And so it's her job to protect her husband throughout his reign, not just in terms of giving him political advice and that would be helpful to him, but also in providing him kind of spiritual support, spiritual protection, and spiritual knowledge. So we have three original figures. We only have two left. One of them is gone. We have a junior wife, and we have her here kneeling. So clearly, we definitely have a hierarchical scale here. We've got a little flute playing god. He's a trickster god, so he's talking about introducing the element of change, the element of the uncertain, and then the fan bearer was on the right. We can see him in the original back here, right here. So I don't know what happened to him in between the original placement in the early 20th century and when it got to Chicago, to the museum in Chicago, but he's now gone. So, of course, you probably should have been thinking of this work, right? The Porch of the Maidens. Now, these maidens actually do help to support the roof of this porch, but we have of course, this is the Erectians, right? The Porch of the Maidens. So they're holding up this roof. And I think I've already mentioned that she actually does. She looks as though she's holding up the roof, but it's designed to look that way. She actually is not load bearing. So we should be thinking of that. Okay, so there's that scarification I talked about earlier, right? So there's lots of kind of texture in the surface ornamentation. Look at the hairstyle in particular. Also look at the crown that the king is wearing. So lots of actually geometric emphasis on surface ornamentation. She's got that elaborate hairstyle, not entirely naturalistic, and yet these elaborate hairstyles would have been something that were actually worn. So this might be a little more extreme than what you would see in reality, but not too far off. So I've already mentioned the scarification, and we have down here these waist beads for her, which also are there to kind of emphasize her beauty. I've talked about the space between the king and the queen, and I've already mentioned that. Okay. So again, the importance of women in Yoruba society. So just as women support the community, the senior wife's body, she's got these strong, we can see that, the strength in her shoulders there, right? They're not kind of sloping shoulders. They're very horizontal, strong shoulders. So that holds up the roof, right? Which is part of the palace, which of course is symbolic. So she's actually gazing down. If you take a look at her pupils, she's gazing down. She's got her hands very protectively on the back of his chair, which is the throne. Again, this echoes the coronation ceremony. Men can't rule without women, right? So he is physically smaller, but he's clearly still important. He's calm. He's got authority. So yes, the crown he's wearing, we want to keep in mind that these things that go on top of the head, projections from the top of the head, are associated with divine presence. So he is not a god. He's a king. He's not a god, but he's been chosen by the gods, right? And so he's got the favor of the gods. The beaded crown is also a link to past rulers. Again, I'm going to emphasize the ancestors, the ancestors, the ancestors, and how important that is because they help keep you safe in the spiritual realm, which has a very strong presence in this realm, right? It's not just something over there. It's something that is in the beyond or in the other atmosphere. It is part of daily life. And so we've got this bird with this long beak. And so that's symbolic of the supernatural watchfulness that he has been granted so that he can keep his people safe. Also, birds represent at the same time. So the supernatural watchfulness of the king, but also birds represent powerful older women. We know from this piece, obviously, women are super important. They also represent female ancestors and female deities, which are all in support of the king, right? So the role of women is going to be important in this culture in particular in terms of keeping things together, keeping society organized, keeping society safe. This video, which I'll put also on the assignment, is not of our veranda post, but also a post by Aloe Avise, and a lot of things it has to say, especially about the woman and her depiction, absolutely apply to our piece, so you should watch it. Thank you very much.